Educators for Social Justice is a grassroots, teacher-led professional development group located in St. Louis, Missouri. The ESJ podcast seeks to provide authentic voice for educators who are doing social justice work in classrooms, schools, and communities. We celebrate a diverse group of teachers and students by discussing their successes, struggles, and visions in effectively implementing social justice education. We invite you to listen and challenge yourself to think about how your work can connect to social justice. Well, today we have Dr. Renee Reset joining us. I'm going to share a bit about Renee and her background, and we're going to jump right into some great conversation. So Renee is an education professional with 13 years of experience with the St. Louis Public Schools. Starting as a chemistry teacher in 2005, she loves supporting students and learning about acid-base titrations.
Titration.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. And the periodic table. However, she realized she could make a greater impact in the lives of children outside the classroom and begin her school leadership journey. Spending time in both neighborhood, also known as comprehensive schools, and magnet schools, issues of equity and the unequal impacts of policy were highlighted in real time before her. This proves to be the spark behind her decision to complete a PhD in educational leadership and policy studies. The desegregation plans in place in the St. Louis region have created a distinct system of separate and unequal schools that remains deeply entrenched in the status quo. You know, we're going to pull that apart today.
Absolutely.
As a school leader, she felt the limits of this system and recognized that it was going to require a different kind of advocacy to make the impact she desired. Dr. Reset is currently serving as a fellow at the Illinois State Board of Education, where she works in the Center for Teaching and Learning. She's involved in a multitude of projects there, including the Diverse Learner Ready Teacher Initiative, the reauthorization of the State Perkins Plan, the Equity Advisory Work Group, and supporting the Early Childhood Education Division in writing the FY20 ECE block grants. So much here to talk about and to share. So again, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're traveling tomorrow and you're just in town for a bit. But Renee, you're from St. Louis?
Actually, no.
Okay, where are you from?
I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and West Lafayette, Indiana, and then went to the University of Wisconsin for undergrad, and actually joined Teach for America.
Okay.
My undergrad is in biochemistry and women's studies, and
I did not know that about you.
Most people don't, because they have this mindset around Teach for America as being, 2 years and out, which has its rightful place. The critique is well deserved. But I was one of the few that stuck around.
Okay. So Teach for America brought you to St. Louis.
Yep, that was my placement. And and then I fell in love with the city and the students and the community and just really put down some roots.
Nice. So we met through Elaine Cha. And Elaine at the time was doing some work with Ford through Ferguson and the Missouri, Education on Compromise Storytelling Initiative. And so that was quite a few years back when you were still principal.
Yeah, it was great. So we actually hosted the storytelling at, it was I think it was an open house that we had in the fall, or it may have been parent-teacher conferences. Yeah. And she put the timeline up and everyone that came through the door interacted with it. It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And I know from Elaine, and even prior to meeting you, she was really keen on the fact that you were a school leader who opened your doors to the community. You deeply care about the students that you serve, and she talked a lot about your advocacy work, right? So we're going to jump in there.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to this part.
Okay, yeah.
In your bio, where it says, let's see, the desegregation plans in place in the St. Louis region have created a distinct system of separate and unequal schools that remains deeply entrenched in the status quo. Can we unpack that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely.
In your work?
Absolutely. So like I said, I started at Central Visual and Performing Arts High School, magnet school. At the time when I started there, as an example, the art department had 5 members. So visual arts, studio art, 2D art. The music department had a piano teacher, a percussion teacher, a strings teacher, a winds teacher, a brass teacher. Just all these staff, right? So I got to see the impact of magnet policy, right? So I was at this school. There were all these great staff members. And then in my first assistant principal role, I landed at Roosevelt, which is about 1.5 miles away, but is a completely different school. And in front of me, I got to see that these children were being given completely different opportunities. I heard teachers in magnet schools say things like, don't continue that behavior or you'll end up at your neighborhood school. I mean, the language that is pervasive in the system around what it means to be in a neighborhood school is an incredibly deep stigma. Right? So then that got me really fired up.
That was the spark.
That was the spark. And so then I really, I got into the PhD program at UMSL. Had been learning about critical race theory, but really dug into it, and what that says is basically racism isn't new, it's here, white supremacy is the cause of it, got into all that, and then was able to access the St. Louis Board of Education archives, got access to that building, so then spent a summer copying documents, copying letters. I also spent time at the county library system going through microfiche and read the Argus. The Globe Democrat got into some of the primary source documents and editorials. And what quickly became clear is that in the litigation, the plaintiffs, Minnie Liddell, the community, was advocating for African-American students. They were the plaintiffs in the case, but it got hijacked by white interest and by white judges, by white attorney generals, by white community members, and quickly the focus, it just got hijacked. And the focus got lost on providing African-American children in this city a better education. When you look at the cost differential, the amount of money spent on magnet schools versus the remedy that was given to the overcrowded neighborhood schools, they're not even comparable. And so, a book is going to come out someday about all this, but for now, folks can download my dissertation. I highlight a lot of the editorials, a lot of the great reporting that was done by the Argus about these issues and the community advocacy, and just a lot of the just really overt racism and also covert racism that was just really present, throughout about 40 years of litigation. And the remnants of which we continue to grapple with and to play out in the system. So all of this was happening while you were yet within the 4 walls of the school. Right. So I was doing all that as an assistant principal. And this was at Roosevelt. And then I transitioned to Gateway. And spent 4 years at Gateway STEM. And so that's where I know I met you and, some of the conversations that we would have around, the things that, you were dealing with as a school leader, the supports that you provided for your students and your staff and your team there. Can you talk about your decision to step away from step away from all of that? So trying to think really what kind of, there were a couple of points where I realized it was taking a toll on me. And I started to recognize that the system, no matter how hard I pushed, was not going to change while I was inside of it. And when I was a principal at Carnahan, I had a 0.4 allocation FTE for a social worker and a nurse. And so that meant my kids got to have access to a nurse and a social worker 2 days a week, despite 1 in 8 of my students going into transition in the course of a year, despite a documented 25% of the student body having asthma, despite all of these issues that we were facing as a school team. No matter what data I showed them, no matter how much I asked, they ignored it. And I just, I mean, to be honest, in a way, it broke me. It broke there was something inside me that shifted.
Yeah.
And recognized that as long as I was staying in the system, I was going to continue to hold it up.
Yeah.
And be a Band-Aid that avoided dealing with the root issues and the impact that white supremacy has had on the system.
Yeah.
Because you would never, in a white school, have a parent that tolerated a nurse 2 days a week. You just wouldn't have it.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about a community that's been historically disenfranchised, it's a very different conversation and a very different level of discourse.
Yeah.
So.